I started with, doc, give me the prognosis. How many years do I have to live? 5 to 10 years, to having a real chance at managing my disease and maybe even having the chance of seeing my daughter grow up.
Welcome to Living Transplant, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the transplant program at Toronto General Hospital and brings you open and honest conversations about the transplant experience. My name is Candice, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Center for Living Organ Donation. I'm also a kidney transplant recipient. This is where I developed my passion to support others in their journey to navigate the world of transplant. Full disclosure, I'm not a physician, and I'm not here to give you medical advice. Think of me as your guide through the world of transplant to educate, inspire, pique your curiosity, and fuel your passion. Living Transplant will show you the world of transplant like you've never seen it before. Welcome back to the Living Transplant podcast. Today, I'm joined by Natalie, a liver transplant recipient who was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer the day before she gave birth to her daughter. Natalie is a creative director from South Africa who is exploring the topic of the fragility of life. She encountered this exact theme when she was 8 months pregnant, feeling generally great until one day on a shoot, she began having pains in her shoulder that were so intense she flew home and went to the emergency room where she was diagnosed. Later, we will be joined by her liver transplant surgeon, Dr. Gonzalo Sapisochin, whose innovative research is opening opportunities for patients to have living liver transplants, to live longer lives, and for some people to be cured of their liver cancer. Thank you so much for joining me and co-hosting this episode with me today, Natalie.
Pleasure.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you can bring us back to that journey of your pregnancy and what brought you to the health news that you ended up getting.
I remember it was the middle of the night, or at least it felt like the middle of the night. It was snowing outside, and I remember there was like snow shining through the street lamps, and a doctor came into the room and sat beside the bed, and it was the first time I'd seen a doctor cry, which was quite intense. And she told me the baby was fine, which was a huge relief, knowing that everything was great with her. But she told me that I had cancer. So 8 months pregnant, sitting there hearing in a hospital that you have cancer is, I don't know, I guess extreme. Certainly not the thing that anyone who starts a pregnancy journey expects. And the shoulder pain was actually transferred pain from my liver, which was riddled with cancer all over it. And as a baby grows inside you, your organs get squished and moved around just to make space for itself. And this was actually pressing on the tumors in my liver, causing the pain. So I think if it weren't for my daughter, I probably would have gone many more years without even knowing that I was sick, really. I had no clear external signs that there was anything really wrong with me. Then after that, she told me in the morning that they were going to induce me and I was going to have my baby. And to top it all off, the next day, they wanted me to have a colonoscopy. They wanted to confirm the suspicions that the cancer had started in my colon and then spread to my liver, which was pretty common. It was a lot to take in, and I think I felt pretty numb. And it was strange, I guess. I went from feeling that numbness to the next day feeling completely overwhelmed and, joy when my daughter was born. And I remember her like laying on my chest for the first time just after she was born. And in my head, counting over and over her fingers and her toes. And she was healthy and she was perfect. And it was just such a relief. And it was quite a jarring difference of emotions between the one evening and the next morning.
And quite a moment that this is a moment of pure joy that you have this beautiful, healthy little baby. and that you have to now face that next giant hurdle of what's coming.
Yeah.
How did you grapple with those two competing emotions?
I don't know. I think I'm quite stubborn and practical when I want to be, or creative. So I just said, well, this is what it is, and I've got to deal with it. And thank goodness for family and friends and support.
You got to introduce your beautiful baby girl to your family, but you also had to tell them what was coming next. How did you do that?
Yes. Well, I remember we called them from the actual hospital bed that evening, which was their morning in South Africa. And I didn't really know what to say. This was just before I was going to be induced. And Dave, my husband, thank goodness for him, he did most of the talking. And I think telling my parents was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And now being a mom myself, I think being in a position where you're unable to help your child is one of the scariest things. I think more than being sick yourself is just that lack of control. And yeah, my mum was on a plane the next day after she got an emergency passport, and yeah, she came to stay with us. She was actually stuck in the country for a year because of COVID, and it worked out really well. She had her own relationship with my daughter, and she helped us so incredibly much. COVID, it actually worked out well for once.
Yeah. They got to have that bonding time that they may not have been able to have without it, right?
Definitely. Yeah, they never would have if it weren't for that.
Wow. And as moms do, always jumping into action immediately when they know that their kids need them, right?
Yeah. I totally get it now. I get
Right?
it.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I used to question my mom's craziness of all the things that moms do until you become one yourself. And then you're like, oh, now I understand you. And also, I'm sorry for everything I've done in the past because you're an amazing human.
Definitely. Mom's 70 something, and you never stop being a mom.
No.
Yeah, it's your title forever now.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Wow. Walk me back to your diagnosis. What was the diagnosis for you and how did they decide to treat?
So I went for the colonoscopy, and they confirmed it was stage 4 colon cancer. And so a month after Alice was born, I started chemo, which was intense. And it was a chemo called Fulfuri, and also an immunotherapy called panitumumab. And it was incredible. They reacted in an instant. I know many people are concerned about the state of healthcare in Canada, but I haven't had anything but the most overwhelming support and luck and help from absolutely everyone. They needed to get my tumors stable, essentially. My CEA levels were pretty astronomical. I think it was like over 3,000 when they first tested my blood. And sort of normal levels for humans in the body is like from 0 to 4. It was incredibly extreme. So they reacted really quickly. I started chemo. It made me incredibly tired, but also so did having a newborn. So there were a lot of parallels with that. But what I found from the chemo, I was incredibly lucky. My body responded really well to treatment. I had the terrible side effects, hair loss, paper thin skin, really, that would like flake off all the time, diarrhea, painful rash on my face that just came out in these terrible blotches. It was awful. They told me that's the way it's working. I was like, great.
Oh,
I certainly don't look very good or feel great, but
yeah.
they assured me that it was working, and my CA numbers every time they did the blood work were halving, which was amazing. They used to call me their star patient, which I I couldn't ask for anything better despite all the terrible side effects. I started with doc, give me the prognosis. How many years do I have to live? 5 to 10 years, to having a real chance at managing my disease and maybe even having the chance of seeing my daughter grow up. There were a lot of sort of conflicting emotions that I was going through. It's great to have this incredibly beautiful little baby, but what if I wasn't going to be there for her? I started getting a little bit more optimistic. And that's when they started talking about putting me onto a HAIP trial. It's a hepatic artery infusion pump trial. The pump is like a small hockey puck sized device, and it was inserted into my abdomen, just under my skin. So you could see it was a little bit bulging out. And it fed chemo directly into my liver, which is pretty incredible. So I felt a bit like a cyborg. Had it connected to an iPad so the nurses could tell how much like liquid they were putting in and how much was left. I just took the chance when I was feeling well to do like things that I like doing, and I really like roller coasters. So then when my brother was around in the summer, we went to Canada's Wonderland, and I was like, oh, I want to go on that ride. I want to go on that one. It was one that like shoots you up into the air and then drops you. And then I look at the sign on the side. It's not a good idea for people with pacemakers or other bodily implants. And I was like, but me, I could just try, see what happens. And my brother was like, he's the responsible one. He's like, no.
The thrill seeker in you.
I was like, he was like, I'm not letting you do that. I was like, come on. And my nurse, actually, I mentioned it to her the next day when I actually went for treatment, and she was like, you probably would have been fine. I had this thing inside of me. I didn't go traveling, so they didn't have to like scan me and wonder if it was a bomb or anything.
Right.
They did warn me actually that it would beep if anything would go wrong with it. Like nothing went wrong. But sometimes when I was lying quietly in bed at night, I could hear a tick very faintly. Captain Hook. He's just having a clock inside me ticking.
Yes.
But yeah, it was, I think, just a crazy experience and crazy adventure, really. Yeah.
And so you did this trial with the HAIP pump, and what was the goal of that?
It was the perfect device to feed chemo directly into my liver without giving me any other side effects, which was incredible. So they could have a concentrated amount of chemo going directly into there and hopefully ensure that it wasn't going to spread anywhere else and potentially even reduce the size of the tumors even more, which it did, which was pretty incredible. They didn't see any new activity. And some of them they saw shrinking, and some of them they said looked completely dormant or like dead, which was amazing. But I still didn't have enough of them. There was still bits lighting up every now and again on the CT scans. There was no way that my liver could be resected essentially in small portions for them to remove all the cancer that way. Yeah. So at the same time that it was inserted, I had a hemicolectomy where they removed a third of my colon. So they got rid of all the cancer in my colon as well, and then inserted the pump, a bit of a 2-in-1. And this was September 2020. So I had the pump for a bit over a year. And then my transplant day was the 6th of December. And then they removed it when I had the transplant. I had no need for it anymore.
How did they decide that you were going to be transplanted? How did you get from the chemo to that decision of let's find a liver for you?
I always say this, it sounds so strange for someone who had cancer to say they're incredibly lucky, but I was in the only province where they were doing this pump trial. And then I get told by my doctors, we want you to go have a chat with this guy. He's a transplant doctor and maybe he can help you. He's also doing a trial. And honestly, I don't remember much of the details the first time I met him. I was like, I had heavy chemo and baby brain fog at the time. I do remember it was just before my first operation. And it was quite a hypothetical discussion. I remember him saying, you're young, relatively healthy, apart from the cancer, of course.
Right.
And if this operation went well, and if you only had cancer left in your liver, I would be a perfect candidate for the liver transplant trial that he was doing. So that was interesting. I clearly remember the second time I met him. It was a few months after my operation, and I'd actually got an infection in hospital. So I was there for 51 days. I was being fed with a tube up my nose, and I was skinny. I was hooked up a portable morphine pump for a few months. And I remember meeting him, and I wasn't necessarily in the best mood to discuss being opened up again, essentially.
Right.
He was Dr. Sapisochin was so understanding and patient, but also brutally honest about the possible risks involved. I think it's great for a doctor to say, we've got a miracle cure, but he was like, here's what we could do for you. Here are the possible risks involved. Would this be something you would be interested in? And I said, look, I just went through quite an ordeal, but I'll think about it and I'll do whatever I need to do to be there for my daughter. I went home and I started to recover and went back onto chemo again. And it's finally started to dawn on me that maybe there was a way that I could actually beat this thing. My husband, I don't know how he stayed so positive. He was like, we're going to beat this. We're going to do it. And I think I started then to realize like maybe I was going to. And then I started thinking about who my donor would be because I had to find a living donor. The trial doesn't allow for deceased donors. So you had to get a willing participant to essentially give you 60% of their. And I started thinking about that. and there was some sort of hope, I guess, in the back of my mind.
Wow. That hope was that if you could find a living donor to donate their liver to you, that could potentially cure the cancer and you could be cancer-free with this transplant.
Yes. Incredibly, because up until then, I hadn't heard the words cancer-free from any doctor. It's from going from stage 4 to being cancer-free it's pretty much unheard of. Obviously it happens, but I didn't even think it was a possibility. It was huge news. Yeah.
When you were told that you had to go find a living donor, how did you go about doing that?
I was incredibly lucky. I say again, lucky.
Yeah.
But my family and close friends, the couple that I had told, were like offering up their livers,
Oh, wow.
whether they were compatible or not. I had people who really cared about me offer, and that meant the world. And I know a lot of people don't even have one person that they can ask, and I know it's an extremely tough ordeal to go through. There's the option of putting out sort of social posts or asking strangers for help. And I'm lucky that I wasn't in the position where I had to do that. I eventually gathered up the courage to ask my brother, who I knew was the same blood type as me, because that's one of the requirements. But asking someone, even if it's someone you know who will say yes, to willingly get cut open and give you 60% of their liver is an incredibly hard, emotional thing to do. And I remember like crying on the phone to him, saying, I know this is really tough of me to ask you, but could you give me your liver? And yeah, it took me months to ask up the courage. But he flew over from California and he underwent a huge batch of tests to see if he was a match. It's determined from body size. They have to be a similar body size to the person they're donating, to health, to where the arteries are positioned themselves, because they have to match them up in a similar place, and a couple of other things. But I guess it was also really nice. He got to meet his niece for the first time.
Yeah.
And they built box forts together, and like a double story one, which probably wasn't like the best idea for a 1.5-year-old to play in a double story box fort, but she loved it. And we went to the beach, and I guess it almost felt normal in some ways. Really lovely and a special visit. But in the end, unfortunately, my brother wasn't a match. The tests came back, and his liver lobe was unusually small, and so they weren't going to risk it. There just wouldn't be enough to take. So I know my brother was heartbroken, actually. I think he felt it was some way he could make a real difference, and so was I. And then my husband just said, "I'll do it." And I was like, "What?" and he made the decision to get himself tested, and it was a long shot. He didn't even know what his blood type was, if he was even a match. And then he was a match. And initially we were like, we weren't even going to consider it because just it would be too risky and logistically difficult with Alice. Both of us undergoing surgery at the same time was quite insane with such a small child. But he got tested, his blood type was a match. He did all his CT scans, he went through the whole process, and in the end, they used his right lobe instead of his left. They did like an opposite of what they usually do, but he had such a great liver. They were like, it'll be perfect and it'll all work out. It'll be a little bit more complicated for them, but they can do it. And yeah, so we said, okay, let's do it.
Wow. You mentioned being a little bit nervous about the two of you being in at the same time. How did you deal with both of you going through this process?
Yeah, well, as I said, Dave felt like he could finally do something for me, which was amazing. And he just wanted everything to be over and done with. And me, I started drawing up our wills. I know it's dark, but it's true. I wanted to make sure everything was in place in case anything happened. And I was conflicted and excited at the same time. And we shipped both sets of our grandparents over. My parents and my brother took the first shift before the transplant and our stay in hospital. And then my husband's parents stayed with us for a month at home with the recovery. We were really lucky. Alice had only just started to get an inkling of the fact that mommy was sick. And I remember her starting to say chemo and things for the first time, which is like heartbreaking. And I was like, well, that's got to stop. And so the grandparents came and they spoiled her rotten with love, and the parents were happy to supply it. And it worked out really well. Again, more time with grandparents.
Wow, that's incredible. You went through the transplant, your husband did well with donating, and you accepted that piece of his liver well. And so were you cancer-free then?
Yes. I didn't want to believe it. I like intellectually I got it, but I think I only really realized it deep inside after my 3-month scan, where they were like, "Yes, you're still cancer free," and I was like, "Are you sure?" And they were like, "Yes, you're cancer free." And yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I still don't believe it, and other days it feels like it never happened. And yeah.
It's quite the journey that your family went on, from pregnancy all the way through to your husband ended up being your donor. You're coming up now on almost your 1-year anniversary of the transplant. How has life changed from that initial day in the hospital till now?
Well, I'm on immunosuppressants for the rest of my life. I get sick very easily, which is tough when you have a daughter in daycare.
Yes.
As I mentioned, sometimes everything just feels so normal that I've forgotten. But the small things definitely give me more joy, like my daughter's giggles or just the sun on my face, or I just appreciate every little moment and I don't want to lose that. And I think I'm more honest with myself about what I really want. I think maybe I used to. I don't know if I was a people pleaser, but I'd do things that I was expected to do, I
Mm.
think. But life is too short to live other people's dreams. So I think I've been stronger to voice what I really want. And what else changed? Well, my husband doesn't buy me birthday presents anymore. And I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, I gave you a liver. Isn't that good enough?" And he made this joke. He was like, "Some couples get like matching tattoos. We've got matching scars." Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, and we're all stronger. We're all stronger for it. I think it's brought us even closer, the whole family, even
Mm.
though we live so far away from each other. We're so incredibly close.
That's beautiful. What's your favorite thing to do as a family?
Oh man. Like apart from sleep.
Yes, right, with a toddler. Yeah, that's a big one.
I think, well, in summer it was chasing down the neighborhood ice cream truck.
Yes.
I used to do that with my dad when I was little. So it was really cool to just see it from my daughter's eyes.
Yeah.
They're handing over the money, getting an ice cream. Just, what do you mean? Trucks go around giving you ice
Yeah.
cream. And that was incredible. And I guess in winter, dance in the kitchen together spontaneously. It sounds cheesy, but we do sometimes. Yeah. So those are some of our favorite things.
Those are the fun things to hold on to, right?
Yeah.
You're in the process of creating a new art installation that centers around your journey and the cancer patient's journey. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm not even sure why I started doing it, but I'd collect every one of my hospital bracelets I received after every chemo session, every MRI, every doctor's visit and hospital stay. I felt like it was a record of the time I'd spent fighting. And
Mhm.
I don't know why. It was a tick. I just couldn't get rid of them. And then later I thought it might be quite interesting to collect other cancer patients' hospital bands and create an installation out of them and arrange them in the way that you'd see marks on a prison wall. You'd have 4 down and then 1 across the days that they'd
Yeah.
spent. And so from a distance, you'd just see a wall of these marks essentially crossing off 5s. But when you look up close there, you realize they're actual hospital bands representing 1 less day on earth spent getting chemo, treatment, radiation, whatever it is, in order to gain sort of 1 more day with people they love. And I'm hoping to display this somewhere epic on a giant wall and just hoping that it'll be a very powerful statement for human resilience, essentially. This is what I'm hoping in my mind. I just need to convince people to give me hospital bracelets now. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think like you said, it's epic, and it's such a beautiful mark of that resilience, like you said, and the strength and the bravery of what people go through when they're fighting through these every single day, to have those moments with their family and to get through that time, to get to the other side of it, where then maybe they can be standing in front of that wall.
yeah. And I think even if you don't get through it per se, its journey is different. And I think everyone is resilient in that situation. People say, like, how did you do that? You're so strong. You're human. You want to survive. You just do it. You just do it. And if there comes a point where you can't, that's okay too. I cannot judge anyone's journey. It's a tough thing to go through, but I like the idea of having some sort of reminder of the days that we have spent and other people have dedicated to cancer patients to make their lives better.
Do you have any advice for people who are going through the cancer journey, or to loved ones who are supporting somebody who has been recently diagnosed?
Oh man, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's a good one and a tough one. For both the loved one and the person being diagnosed, you're not alone. You may feel you're alone. You may feel you don't want to be a burden on anyone. And I was the same. I wanted to show I was strong. And I think the biggest thing I learned was to be humble and accept help. And it's okay to ask for help. And there is always someone who wants to help. Even if you don't have family, there are support groups, there are government programs, which we're lucky to have a lot of in Canada, but there's always something. There's someone online, there's talk to someone, get someone to help you. There'll be a meal train. There'll be someone willing to help you clean your house. I think, yeah, we need to know we're not alone. And I think, and then just on a side note, for young cancer patients, follow the cancer patient on Instagram, as in the cancer patient. And there are lots of great memes. Cancer muggles will totally not get. And you will show them to your spouse or your friend, and they will not get it, and you will laugh. And it's just a special community. And they've got some really good discussions that they have in their stories section. And I think in that way, you even feel you're not alone. You're like, I thought that was only me. That person is also dealing with that. And I think having a sense of humor makes everything more bearable. And that's what I tried to do during my journey.
Amazing. And I love that you call people who have not had cancer muggles. That's too funny.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of language for young cancer patients.
That's great.
From scanxiety to cancer muggles to, there's a bunch of them, and it's great to know you're not alone. It's important.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we didn't talk about?
What else could I add? I'm one of the lucky ones, but my story could have gone incredibly differently. I have some survivor guilt. I know some people in a very similar situation to me with young kids, and their cancer is not going away. It's spread too far that they weren't given the opportunities I was given with the trials that I was on. And it's hard seeing them go through it. And there's only so much you can do, and be friends with them and tell them that you're there. And it's tough. Also, with my cancer, there's a real possibility of it coming back, especially in the lungs. But I just try and appreciate today. I'd love to say I try and be happy every day. You can't always be happy. But you can always appreciate something, or at least be curious, even if the day turned out terribly. Be curious about what you did and learn something from it, and look forward to the next day, even if you don't know what's going to happen.
That's beautiful. Thank you. We talked about this remarkable person that came into your life who is here on the line with us now. I'm wondering if you can introduce him for us.
Sure. Ooh, big ask. Dr. Gonzalo Sapisochin is an associate professor of surgery at UHN, multi-organ transplant, and HPB surgical oncology division of general surgery. And he also gave me a new liver. So welcome, Dr. Sapisochin.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
As Natalie was mentioned, I'm a transplant surgeon and also a hepatobiliary surgeon. I've been in Canada now. I was talking with some of my colleagues yesterday. I couldn't believe it. I've been here for 9 years now, and I came from Barcelona, Spain, for some training. We came for 2 years, and we've been 9. I specialize in dealing with liver malignancies, primary liver cancers like hepatocellular carcinoma or cholangiocarcinoma, but I also specialize in metastatic disease or spread of disease to the liver, like colorectal liver metastasis. And I have a strong research interest in advancing science in the knowledge of these kind of cancers, and especially on a concept called transplant oncology, which is actually utilizing transplantation to treat patients with either primary liver malignancies or secondary liver malignancies. So I dedicate a lot of my time, obviously operating patients, but I dedicate a lot of my time in doing research, and I have a medium to large research team with a lot of young individuals that are very enthusiastic, and we have different research projects going on any given time. Out of work, I'm very into sports. So I'm really into cycling, so I cycle a lot, as much as I can, and I'm really into sports. And I'm a father of two kids that are very busy, and yeah, that's a little bit of a summary.
What made you interested in transplantation in the beginning, and specifically liver transplant?
I've been asked that before, and I've thought quite a bit about it. So both my parents are doctors, but they're actually both psychiatrists, and they do pure psychoanalysis. So not really close to surgery. My grandfather was a surgeon in Argentina, and he actually was, at the time, and this is when he was operating in the 50s, liver surgery is not that modern. Actually, liver surgery has been with us probably for 40 years. And at the time he was starting to do some liver and biliary surgery. And since I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. And since I was a kid, I actually knew I wanted to be a surgeon. First, a cardiac surgeon. But then when I was in Madrid, third year of medical school, I joined as an intern. It was called at the time a surgical unit. And it was one of the surgical units in Spain that were doing more liver transplants. There was a very famous surgeon, now retired. And that was the first time I saw a liver transplant. And I clearly said, well, this is what I'm going to do. This is unbelievable. And this is exactly what I want to do. And that was in my third year of med school. And then I started focusing on that. And it's actually absolutely fascinating, right? A liver transplant or an organ transplant, the first time that the blood goes through the new organ again and the organ kind of becomes alive again, it's something that it's extremely unique. And obviously, it also really attracted me how much you help people. You really impacting lives in a way that it's really strong. The impact is brutal in someone that has either organ failure or has a incurable cancer. So I think those were both the reasons I got into this.
Thinking about that liver transplant that kickstarted all of it, you were also part of the first study in North America that showed living donor liver transplants were viable for people who had controlled their colorectal cancer and liver tumors. Can you describe to us what is done to help those patients to get to that point where they could have that transplant?
Yeah, for years, people, especially in Oslo, in Norway, have thought that, as we do in surgical oncology, we know that patients with liver cancer, when the cancers are obviously confined to the liver, the only real potential for cure is the combination of systemic therapies but surgery. There's no real therapies, even though the world of immunotherapy is really changing. There's no real therapies that cure liver cancers or metastatic disease to the liver. So we know that the only option is to remove these tumors. Mm-hmm. And even though we do very advanced surgery, and there's a lot of things we can do with the liver is a fascinating organ that regenerates. It's the only organ that regenerates, and that's actually something that's absolutely fascinating. There's many patients that we can't operate. So the thought was, if the only way of curing these patients is removing the disease, and the only way to remove this disease is removing the whole liver, and you can't live without a liver, why don't we start doing transplants? And this started happening in Norway. The issue in Norway, and I actually know the people there very well, they have a very interesting problem. That is that they have a surplus of organs. So they have more organs than patients in the waiting list, which is certainly not the problem we have in North America or in many other countries. So in Toronto, the only way to be able to do this is with a living donor. And we are, thanks to many of my partners and senior colleagues that started this amazing program many years ago, we have the benefit of being able to offer living donation in this setting. So we put together, we're one of the only programs doing this in North America. And with other two programs, we put together for series demonstrating outside of Oslo that this could be done safely and that this could be done and actually help patients. So the way these patients are selected, it has to be patients that have disease only in the liver. Obviously, if the cancer has spread outside of the liver, this is not a possibility. And they have to be very stable on systemic chemotherapy. And that's a way of testing the tumor biology, right? So if the tumor is controlled with systemic chemotherapy, and in some cases, Natalie, is that she had direct therapy to the liver through a pump, it's a way of controlling the biology of this tumor. That tells us that these tumors are not going to spread after the transplant. And those are the candidates we're looking for this possibility.
You probably answered this question, but any sort of other criteria you need to meet to have a living donor transplant as a patient?
Yeah, so in this setting, the criteria we utilize, so these are patients with spread from the colon cancer. So the colon, the primary tumor has to be resected. So usually we have to wait at least 6 months. And as I said, they have to be controlled. They can't have disease outside of the liver. And currently we're only doing living donors, given the gap we have in Ontario between the number of organs and patients in the waiting list. So patients have to have an available living donor. But those are the main criteria.
Yeah. I was one of those lucky ones.
Yeah. What would be the benefits and risks of having a living donor liver transplant for people like Natalie and other cancer patients?
Yeah, I'm talking specifically about colorectal liver metastasis, and they're still under investigation, even though there's more and more data coming from actually other centers besides Oslo, and the Oslo data is being updated, that this seems to really impact in the survival. So in terms of benefit, as I was saying, removing all the disease, if it's only in the liver, seems to really benefit patients. And even though we don't have data still comparing transplantation with the standard of care, which is chemotherapy, even though there's a trial in France looking into that, it seems that if you extrapolate, which is not something perfect to be done, but if you extrapolate what is the outcome of patients only on systemic chemotherapy compared to transplant, it looks like the benefit of transplant is there. Obviously, this is a very big operation that can't be done to everyone. Patients need to be healthy. There's definitely a risk for the recipient because these are one of the biggest operations we do in the abdomen. But in general, in Toronto, we have a long experience with I think at this point, over 1,200 or 13 cases of living donation. We're the largest program in North America, so it can be done very safely. And we can never forget that there's also a risk in the donor, which is obviously our main concern. It's a healthy individual that's becoming a hero if he or she was not a hero already. And there's definitely a risk in the donor. The risk is small. That's something that we obviously take hugely into account, because at the end of the day, we're removing around 60 to 70% of the liver in the donor. But usually these donors do very well, and after a week they're home and don't have major problems.
Amazing.
It is amazing. I've heard this so many times and it still amazes me every time.
Yeah.
And then I'd just like to know, are there any sort of long-term impacts to someone's health? Me who's undergone chemotherapy as well as part of this.
Yeah, I think it's the long-term outcome is obviously hard to know, because there's no that long-term follow-up in patients that had chemo and now have immunosuppression, etc. Obviously, as we were talking before, we're always worried that the tumor may come back, but obviously the more the years pass, the less that risk is. And we think that we can actually treat many of the patients once the tumor comes back. I think the main risk is obviously the body doesn't like external drugs, and chronic immunosuppression impacts many organs, etc. However, I would say that I haven't taken them, so I'm talking about what patients say. So maybe Natalie, you would be better. But in general, these drugs are well tolerated. And I always say, I had a patient back home in Barcelona that became a friend, and he was doing triathlons after a liver transplant. He was actually pretty good. And he would be really good at cycling, running, swimming. And so I think most patients after a liver transplant have a completely normal life with a very high quality of life in most cases.
And you talk about those immunosuppressants that are needed. Are the immunosuppressant therapies any different in somebody who's received a liver transplant because of cancer versus somebody for another reason?
So it's a good point. So as there's cancer, immunosuppression, there's always has to be a balance between our body. Like we know from cancer biology that our body always is fighting against pre-cancer cells, and the body knows how to find them and destroy them before they become a cancer, etc. And obviously, if you're decreasing your immune system with immunosuppressants, there's a risk that the cancer may come back earlier, etc. That's been really shown in basic science, in laboratory data. There's not a lot of data, real good data in patients and in clinics, but it makes sense. So what we try and do in patients transplanted with cancer is to decrease the immunosuppression as much as we can. I think we've learned in the last 20 years to be less scared about rejection and be able to have lower levels of immunosuppression and be less worried about rejection. So I think that's one of the things we try in patients for cancer is minimize immunosuppression.
Mm-hmm. We talk about living donation. I know how incredibly beautiful living donation is and the impact it has on our lives. Natalie is amazing proof as well of what it does for us. But do you have an idea with all of your work that you do, why those rates are so low and what we could do to increase that?
Yeah, well, I'm going to actually, I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to challenge you that it's low in Canada. I think actually, so it's depending what you compare it with, right? Like our living donors in the liver transplant setting, it's around 20 to 25% of the liver transplants we currently do are living donors.
Nope.
And that to other centers in the Western world, we are actually the largest program and we have the largest proportion. So this is actually high in the Western world. Obviously, it's very different than in Asia. In Asia, most transplants are done with living donors. But I think your point is very well taken in the sense that we still have 30% of patients that never make it to transplant and die while waiting. So I think that is where I think programs like ours need to educate about the importance. And I think we've been getting better at showing one data. So we've done many studies showing that if you have a living donor, just not for this indication, but for other indications, the chances of you surviving since you need a transplant are higher because your chances of dying while waiting obviously decrease. And I think education of the population is key by doing science and research and demonstrating with data, and then by educating people. So that's why this program is so important.
How do you ensure that patients like me going through all of this not only just survive, but have a good quality of life and thrive afterwards?
Yeah, there's a lot of education that goes into it and programs to educate the population. I think one of the things is that, again, as I was saying at the beginning, transplant works and patients actually feel very well after a liver transplant, right? I think patients, as time goes by, realize that they're back to normal and feeling well. And this obviously it doesn't happen in days or months. It probably happens in maybe years or at least many months. But I think patients actually themselves feel really well. And obviously in someone like you, there's always this nerve-wracking moment of doing scans every 3 months and getting to those scans and making sure there's no recurrence. And it's the anxiety around those 3 months. And I think what we do is to try and help the patients go through that journey that we know is definitely very stressful for the patients. It's also stressful for the teams when we're waiting for those scans. Absolutely. So.
Yeah. Guys care just as much as we do. So And I like that. And I think, I agree, there's totally that scan anxiety, but knowing that you guys, every 3 months, you're monitoring me. And if anything does happen, we'll be able to sort it out. You won't be catching it years down the line. And I think for me, that's quite a big relief, especially when I'm trying to reduce my stress as much as possible. So thank you.
Yeah.
And thinking about those scans and follow-up for all transplant patients, but for your patients specifically, is there, and I know you might not have long-term data, but is there a rate of success for having these liver transplants for cancer patients?
Yeah, data we have, again, it's relatively limited because as I tell patients now when I see them in clinic, like there's probably been, I don't know the numbers, we don't have them, we're working on an international registry, but I don't think there's more than 130, 150 transplants done in the world for this condition. So it's relatively new and rare. We know with the data we have is that now there's 10-year survivals with no recurrence, meaning patients that were transplanted more than 10 years ago, the cancer never came back, they're alive and they're cured, right? So, but that proportion, obviously the numbers get smaller because we don't have enough follow-up and enough data. I think that it's reasonable to say that the chances of being alive 5 years after a transplant like this nowadays for this condition, for colorectal liver metastasis, is probably around 60 to 70%. And the chances of the tumor coming back is probably in the same range, in the 60 to 70% range. I think what's important that we were just discussing is that we follow the patients very closely. And in case anything was to pop up, we would probably aggressively deal with it, meaning that depending where the recurrence is, we would treat it surgically.
Mm-hmm. I know we don't like to throw around the word cure often, and people sometimes will ask me as a transplant recipient, well, is your kidney disease cured now that you have a transplant? And it's not a cure, it's a different form of treatment. Sure. But when you're transplanting patients who have liver cancer, is this a cure for that cancer, or would you say it's more of a treatment that is a long-term treatment?
It goes to the definition of cure. I think that obviously for the condition we're talking about today, colorectal liver metastasis, I don't think we have an answer yet. We do have patients, there's literature of patients that are cured, but curing cancer is obviously a very big word. I can tell you that for other cancers that we transplant, like hepatocellular carcinoma, which is primary liver cancer, I think there's now very good data of median survivals of 15 years with no recurrence. And I think that is cure. So we'll have to see. We've learned, obviously, the cancer we transplant most is primary liver cancer, hepatocellular carcinoma. And now we have very long-term data of patients that are cured. And that's when we transplant patients with metastatic liver disease, the goal of the transplant is clearly cure, even though, again, it's hard to define cure in this setting.
I might have mentioned this to you when we chatted last time. I was just curious how many patients you've operated on since my transplant a year ago.
I think when we did your case, I can't remember if you were our case number 4 or 5. Anyway, we've done a total of 7. So I think after you, we've done either 2 or 3. So we definitely did a case. We did a case like less than a month ago, but then we did a couple of cases. We did another case like I think probably 3 after yours.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've done a total of 7, and we have 3 more that will happen very soon, hopefully in the next 3 months. Since we've started, I see a candidate for this, at least a candidate a week.
Wow.
As Natalie was saying at the beginning, not every patient is a candidate. And then some were able actually to operate and resect, which is something that we sometimes thought with Natalie at some point. It's a difficult disease to decide. What I can tell you too is that our own data and others support that when patients have a lot of disease in the liver, even if you can take it out, probably there's going to be more data showing that transplant is better actually. So I think what's going to happen, and I'm fortunate enough that I've become a key opinion leader in the topic, and I go around the world giving talks about the topic, that more and more this is happening in most places around the world. There's more data coming out. There's more evidence that this works. And I think if we had this podcast in 5 or 10 years, I think we're going to see that this is a clear indication. And there's actually already discussions here in Ontario with the government on the possibility of utilizing deceased donors for this indication, given that there's more and more data showing that this is very good outcomes for these scarce organs.
How would that impact a cancer patient if they have to wait?
So that's obviously a very smart and excellent question, and that's why living donation is so good in this setting, because with living donation you can plan the chemo, you can plan when to stop the chemo.
Fascinating. You are part of the International Society of Liver Surgeons, which sounds like a really cool, like James Bond-like society.
It's actually pretty fun. You're right.
I'm wondering if you can talk to us about that society and any of the innovation and research that's happening either at UHN or around the world.
Yeah, so it's not James Bond, but it's kind of fun. It's a fun group of surgeons. It's a society that is built between a Korean group and a group in Turkey, and it's basically a group of individuals that we're all doing similar things and trying to advance science in the field of transplant oncology, organ transplantation, and surgical oncology. There's actually going to be a meeting in Istanbul, and there's a lot of innovation there. What many people are starting to do is utilize, with deceased organs, we can actually split organs or split livers in two. So is to utilize a small proportion of liver, way smaller than what we, for example, utilized in most living donors like Natalie's, where we utilize 60% of a liver. Here is probably like 20% of the liver, and transplanting this in a way that it's auxiliary transplant without removing the other liver, waiting for that liver to regenerate, and then removing the deceased organ. So this is something called rapid procedure. And it's a combination of utilizing the concept of transplantation and the concept of liver regeneration. So it's utilizing both and manipulating the body to grow what we want and not grow what we don't want, and then weeks later removing part of the diseased liver. So it's actually a very interesting concept. It's all very innovative. There's probably been 15 cases done around the world. And it's going to be a group of individuals discussing this. It's a very interesting group and a lot of things happening. The group actually created, I think, 6 or 7 research or study groups. I actually lead one in living donor liver transplantation, and it's actually looking at outcomes of living donor liver transplants for hepatocellular carcinoma around the world. So it was like an open study, and there's been groups from all around the globe participating. So lots of very interesting things happening in that group.
I guess maybe it's too heavy, and just tell me if it is, but how do you deal with it every day? How people come in who are hoping to be part of your trial, who can't get in, and how do you tell them no? How do you put someone else's life in your hands and give them a new liver and be confident enough to do that and know they're going to survive? I like, every time I think about it, is I could not have your job. And I'm glad there is someone like you, but how do you do it every day?
Yeah, it's a fascinating job. I wouldn't change my job for anything I do. But I think you're getting to a point that we also go through a lot of mental stress, and it's key to be able to separate things as much as you can. And some of us are not as good as others to separate things, and I'm not great. I think what's worked for me is, one is to be very honest with patients. I am very honest, and I find myself in situations where patients come to my clinic where no one has really told them anything, even though they've seen a lot of doctors previously, and I'm very honest, and I think that's important. And I think when things go badly and we think about all the sadness that goes, as you were saying, of telling someone no. You also have to grab with people like you and think about all the beautiful stories that there are there and all the people you can help. And then my cope mechanism is exercising. That's where I release tension, and I couldn't live without that, right? And that's why I'm probably that obsessed with cycling, because that's a bit of my way of releasing stress, and probably that's how I cope. And we all find different coping mechanisms, because it's definitely stressful and hard. And the surgical piece, I'm sure you will do it. It's just a matter, you get used to it. You just get used to operating, and it's beautiful, actually. It's really nice.
Unfortunately, my coping is baking,
Yeah.
which means there's a lot of sweets in the house.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, but for me, sports is like meditating. For me, like cycling is like meditating, actually.
I just want to say thank you for caring, and thank you for giving me my life back.
Yeah, no, those are very nice words.
So I appreciate it.
I've got one question for both of you, and I'll start with you, Natalie. And this is what I call the really hard-hitting, difficult journalistic question. If you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be?
Oh my goodness. If I were a tree, I guess it would have to be something indigenous, because my father, he's a naturalist and gets rid of invader plants for a living. I have a silver maple that I'm looking at right now outside in my garden, and apparently it's one of the oldest in the neighborhood. And part of our contract with our landlord was that we weren't allowed to chop any trees down. And it was actually one of the reasons why we decided to rent the place, because it's huge. It's got moss growing on the side of it. It's a pain when all the leaves fall down and you have to fill up like 12,000 bags. But it keeps us shaded, and it's peaceful. And when the wind blows, it's like sways gently, and it just goes with things. And I want to be that tree. I just want to have some peace and quiet and go with the wind and enjoy the sunshine.
That's beautiful. And what about you?
I guess I had the 2 minutes that Natalie was talking to think about it, so I had a little bit more time to think about it. You know what? I think I would be one of those Californian sequoias that are like high, tall, and you can see the world from up there. When I've been there in those national parks, it's just unbelievable how I'm sure that what happens up there, only they know, but I'm sure it's absolutely fascinating. As Natalie was saying, that heights, just dealing with air up there and wind up there and rain up there and birds up there. So I would be one of these Californian red sequoias.
That's beautiful. And thank you so much, Dr. Sapisochin. We're so grateful for your time and for all of the work that you do. Natalie is incredible proof that you're saving lives, and not just for the one person, but also for the family and for their friends and their community. So thank you for the incredible work that you do every day. We're so grateful.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you, Natalie, for being so open and vulnerable and sharing your journey, and for educating other people about making sure that they're on top of their health as well. And I'm so happy to know that you're coming up on your anniversary and that things are going well. So we'll definitely have to celebrate that too.
I know. I was actually talking to my husband, and I was like, what are we going to do? It's my 1 year anniversary of Cancer Free. I was like,
definitely celebrate it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Bring me a slice.
Yes.
Exactly. Bring me a slice. I would love that.
Don't forget to subscribe to Living Transplant Podcast wherever you're accessing this today. Please share with your friends. And if you have any ideas for future podcast episodes, you can reach out to us at livingorgandonation@uhn.ca. And for more information on living organ donation, you can visit us at www.livingorgandonation.ca. Thank you for listening.